Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's watch.
You want water, baby?
No.
No, you're good.
Drink way too much already.
So we had an enormous, I call it a breakdown in our relationship, with the fight after the engagement party. And then I had therapy that following Friday, and I just said, I'm going to therapy. You're welcome to.
Oh, great. So he is still in therapy. That's promising. Are they working on stuff? Let's just assume, it would take a long time, but sometimes therapy isn't really working on the stuff. I don't want to accuse anyone of anything. It's always the kind of tendency is, and I would have that happen to me. I'd be working with someone like Ed, and there would be repeat transgressions, and the people would attack me. They'd call me up or something and be like, you're wasting your time. You're a terrible therapist. And I'd be like, depends on confidentiality in terms of how I might be able to respond, and clinically how I would respond. But what I'd be thinking is, look, I'm working on it, but this is a long-term thing. And I'm taking it slow because if I go fast, they can't handle that. So I definitely see it, believe me. So we don't know. But it also sounds like he's bringing Liz to his individual therapist, which is, I could go into the details as to why that's not a good idea. Some people will say that's like inherently unethical. It's not. It can be, but if they go to a couples therapist, I would much rather them just find a separate couple there. Now, if they decide to transition and terminate his individual therapy file and then reinitiate a new file with the two of them, that could work too, because the therapist would know him. Hopefully, that meant because that'll happen sometimes. I'll have an individual. I don't usually do this sort of thing, but I have in the past where an individual, and we're talking a lot about their relationships, and then they're like, I want to bring my partner in for a session or two, and I'll say like, well, there are ethics and considerations for you, the two of you, as to whether or not we should do that. Here's the lay of the land. And, we talk about it. I'm talking about with the individual client. And we eventually conclude that I'm comfortable with and they want to close the individual file and start a new file in which we see the couple as a new client. Because I won't get in the weeds in terms of ethics and confidentiality and da-da-da. But the benefit to that, I believe that when I've made that, because what the risk that people will think is that I'll be on Ed's side, right? And I'll be against Liz because I'll have this affinity for Ed, and Liz will get, crapped on in the therapy session. But my style of therapy is really not like that. If I have an Ed character in my office, I don't take their side. If anything, I'm harder on them because I feel like I have a stronger relationship with them. I'm not the sort of therapist that is like constantly validating everyone all the time. I'm validating and I'm caring, and I have a lot of love and a lot of compassion. But if someone's shooting themselves in the foot, even if they don't tell me, I will look for it because people do that. I don't always see it, but I'm definitely oriented that way. I'll never forget, years and years ago, I had a client that I'll never forget this. In fact, behind me is something, up on the wall above me. I had this maple tree in the front of my yard. I've always had a home office, or I have had for 22 years now. And in the house I lived in back then, I had this maple tree in the front yard, and it was fall, and the red maple leaves were falling. And my client, we had a really long, good relationship, and she liked coming to therapy, and I liked working with her. She collected a bunch of these maple leaves and dried them and pressed them into a frame, and I just loved it, this gift that she gave me, and I have always brought it with me through the various different places I've lived, and I keep it as a reminder about this client. It's kind of a complicated relationship that I won't bore you with, but one of the things that she said to me was that she was telling me a story, and she's like, yeah, I was hanging out with my friends, and I said that I was in therapy, and my friend said, oh, you're in therapy, your therapist just probably tells you that everything you do is great all the time, and just validates everything that you do. And my client says to her friend, she says, well, no, my therapist almost never lets me get away with things. He's nice and he's compassionate, but he confronts me a lot on my crap. So, and I remember feeling both I cringe, like, oh, am I being too harsh? But I also took a lot of pride in that because I've never wanted to be that kind of a therapist and I don't think it's real therapy to just, take someone's story as face value and just be like, yeah, everyone else is to blame for your problems, Ed. You know what I mean? So that doesn't do anyone any good, particularly Ed, if that's what's happening. But we don't know what's happening. So now they're about to go into therapy, and it sounds like they're going to go into his therapist. So my point is that if I had a client like that, I have actually really gone after the client that I have a connection with, and I've taken it easy on the new client until I have a better relationship with them. And I'm not blasting people. I'm not like chastising them or anything. I'm just like, like with Ed, if he were my client, and I'm guessing that he would have a very particular way of talking about what his experiences are with Liz. And I'd be like, and I'd validate, I'd be like, wow, that sounds tough. Sounds like you had a pretty big fight. Sounds like it sounds like you're framing it as you have some issues and she has some issues. And in my head, I'm probably thinking Ed probably was to blame for a lot, if not most of what's happening. I don't necessarily say that, but I might wonder. And so I would say, okay, well, Ed, what were you feeling when you saw Liz and this other woman fighting? What was going on for you on the inside? It'd be like he'd probably say like, well, I don't know, it just looked like a lesbian fight or something. That's literally what he thought. So I would say, okay, well, those are your thoughts, those are the conclusions, but what's going on in your heart? What's going on in your body? And I really want to orient people, particularly to their torso and their lungs and their heart and their intestines, their liver. It's like, what's going on in your torso, your muscles, your ribs, your shoulders, what's going on there? And hopefully, if I do this enough with him, he would be able to eventually get to this place of like, well, I was afraid. Okay, you were afraid. That was what was happening. It was fear. You saw it and you became afraid. What was that fear? What was the fear of? Okay, it probably takes a while, but eventually you get to the place where he was afraid that he was going to lose Liz. And by being able to see it that way, he'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because even if it was lesbians attacking each other, it was about a relationship while we were broken up. So it doesn't really matter, right? And plus they're fighting. So if it is the fantasy I have in my mind, it doesn't really indicate I'm going to lose Liz. And it wasn't that. It was a complete distortion. I just made up a completely weird, effed up story. And so my feelings don't really reflect reality. I saw something and completely distorted it into something that it was me. I did something to me. Something happened and I distorted it to give me a terrible, terrible feeling. And then, and so we'd get to that place, and notice I'm not saying, Ed, you're abusive, right? I'm going through the steps, and however he wants to frame it, he'd be able to frame it of, oh, I'm distorting it, and my feelings are reflective of that distortion. It makes sense I would have those feelings because I convinced myself of something that I saw based on my schemas. And then with those feelings, I had a particular way of dealing with it that is also particular in an abusive, aggressive, accusatory, arrogant way, because that's, that'd be another direction I try to, get with them to understand. So anyway, they're going to therapy, which is, I think, good.
This episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. Navigating all the various challenges we face can make you feel unsure or stuck in place. Whether it's a relationship, or going through grief, or considering a new career. And, generally speaking, a therapist can really help with that. By helping you to explore your feelings, and by giving you the space to clarify what you want to do. In my life, I can't imagine where I'd be without the therapy I've had. During some of the biggest moments of my life, therapists have been there for me. To slow me down, to listen to me, to help me explore. Well, that's where Betterhelp comes in. As the world's largest therapy service, Betterhelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Kirk. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
And she said, I would love to go.
I love these.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Got water?
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm good.
Maybe blankies?
Okay.
So at that point,
So she put her hand on his shoulder, which is totally fine. There's a lot of paranoia about that kind of thing. As therapists, we want to be very careful about doing anything like that. But I come from a style of therapy where I might do that sometimes with people that I either know because we've talked about it, or I greatly intuit that would comfort them, you know. Now, I will say that some therapists will take it pretty far in a way that they're trying to be helpful by, like, you know, cuddling their clients, and that can be risky, obviously, and potentially involve a lot of countertransference. And some therapists will use touch in very exploitative, harmful, criminal ways. And I've worked with cases like that before, where the client who was harmed hired me as a consultant, as an expert to, you know, weigh in on the ethics of that. And I've talked about that in previous episodes. But anyway, so I just want to comment on that. You know, put hands on. It's a little bit of a warmth thing. It makes you feel like you're being taken care of, and it's, you know, it's a good move, I think. It looked like Ed was okay with it.
we begun to try to rebuild our friendship and our relationship altogether.
Here's your blankie
Oh,
list.
thank you.
All right, sweetnesses, how are we today?
We're good.
Good day.
Good
Good
day.
to start, yeah.
What do you want to give each other credit for that you did well?
This doesn't look like the first session, because they just sat down and she just asked that question. It sounds like Liz and the therapist know each other already. So that's the first thing. If this is the very first session, that would be really weird, potentially unethical, because you need to assess, you need to get consent, you need to give certain disclosures, there's paperwork. I'm just going to assume this is not the very first session, or they edited it in a way that we wouldn't watch that. And that would make sense, right? They wouldn't want to bore us with those details.
He got up at 5:15 this morning
Wow.
and went and worked out for an hour and a half while I slept in. But I did feed the dogs.
I want to give Ed credit for the other day. I can't remember what the topic was, but he kept kind of like wanting to push at it for a minute, but I was like, I need a moment. So then he gave me space. So that's
You're
been
learning to give her space.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good on a number of levels. One being that at least the topic is on the table regarding him being invasive, right? It's not, at least one of his issues is on the table. We don't know to what extent, because I think for me, clinically and personally, I'm oriented in the same direction right here, which is that as a citizen, as an it's hard for me to differentiate the two, really, because as a citizen, I'm also a therapist, and I don't really think like a non-therapist because I can't. But either way, I would want on the table the topic to be that he has issues of insecurity related to his traumas and has a particular way of reacting to it that is not okay, not conducive to the relationship. If he wants the relationship to work out, he doesn't want to alienate her and push her away, then he has to learn how to deal with those impulses and how to see the world in a different way, how to be more vulnerable. And I said this at the time, during the fight that they had at the engagement party, if he would have gone to her and said something like, "So, Liz, earlier you were fighting with your ex-coworker, and that looked awful, and I want to validate you and listen to you, but I'm having an emotional crisis right now. I have an impulse to invade and do all my normal thing, but I've been in therapy, and so, you know, I have some awareness and differentiation right now, and so I would just want to tell you that I'm having an interpretation of it in which you and her were in a relationship, and a lesbian relationship. I know that doesn't make any sense because you're not even bisexual. And even if you had a relationship with her, it was when we were broken up. But that's really beside the point. When I just saw you, I had this paranoia that you were secretly involved with her. And then I had this fantasy, this distortion that you were going to leave me and that you were really in love with her. I know it doesn't make any sense. But that's where I went, and I had this fear, this overwhelming sense of fear, and then I wanted to attack you, but then I know that that doesn't make any sense, and so I'm trying to be more vulnerable and more good in this relationship, and so I'm coming to you right now, and can you reassure me, because I'm panicking, and there, you know, I'm on the edge right here. Can you convince me that you weren't in a relationship with her and that you're not going to leave me? Okay. Because Liz probably would have said like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not a lesbian. I'm not bisexual. We were fighting about this and that. Yeah, my ex-coworker, she's lesbian, but I've never been with her. And I've never cheated on you, and I don't want to leave you. And oh my God, thank you for saying. I will even role play that in therapy with couples. It's actually, you see me do it often, but I learned it with my couples and really all my clients. But if we're talking about couples, I will role play. I'll say, okay, we'll talk about the interaction. And then I'll say to Liz, okay, Liz, what if he came to you and he said this? So instead of me trying to get Ed to do that, I'll just, present an option. And one, it gives Liz a chance to try that on, right? She might be like, oh, yeah, that would have felt a lot better because this, and this. And then, because Ed, in all likelihood, feels like, well, she doesn't want me to, because they'll derive these conclusions like, well, she doesn't even want me to bring it up, and she wants a strong man, so all these like weird ideas. But then to see the Liz character go, wow, Kirk, the way you role played that would have been wonderful. I wish Ed would do that. Then Ed's like, oh, so she is open, because a lot of times the Eds of the world, they conclude there's really no road to getting compassion from their partner, and so they put up these walls while attacking. And so to learn like, oh, if I am open, if I am vulnerable, not only will they receive me, but things will go so much better for me. And also, if I just tell Ed to be more vulnerable, the Eds of the world, in all likelihood, they don't even know what that is. They hear the words, but they don't know what that means. And so when I actually role play it, they'll say, oh, that's what he's talking about when he's talking about vulnerability. That's what he's talking about when he's talking about non-accusatory talk. And I know a lot of you have actually given me feedback that you've said you've liked it when I've role played like that. That's why I have that merch that says, if being healthy means being corny, then be corny. Or what is it? I think that's what it is. I wear that shirt all the time because, one, when I'm in public, people can't tell that it's a merch from my podcast, so it doesn't, if someone recognized me or if they knew I had a podcast. Anyway, point is it feels more general as a shirt. And so, I'll never wear just a shirt that says we have a new thing. It's just a Psychology in Seattle, and it just seems like ridiculous for me to wear that shirt. I love that shirt. I can't wait to see one in the wild. That'd be a trip. But anyway, the point is if being corny means being healthy, then be corny. If being healthy means being corny, then be corny. Because I would get that from some of the clients. I would role play it. They'd be like, well, that's corny. And I'd say like, well, if being healthy means being corny, then be corny. So yeah, to summarize, I'm just glad that the issue of him being evasive is on the table, but I don't know to what extent. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.